Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is an absolutely chilling, deep, underground nightmare by the incredible mind of GraceGabriellle over on Reddit No Sleep. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Don't Go Hiking Near Bear Cove. Let's get straight into that. My boyfriend Tyler and I live in Silverpine Ridge, a small town at the foot of Buffalo Mountain, Colorado. It's a resort town, so between the months of June and September, it can get pretty crowded. If, like me, you're lucky enough to work in a bar of one of the only chain hotels in town, the seasons can be relentless. Unfortunately, the benefit of living in a resort town is the very reason that people flock here in the first place. The White River National Park lies 15 miles from town, where it's one of the most beautiful areas in the whole of the United States, with luscious forests, turquoise rivers, and gushing waterfalls. Tyler grew up here and, although I only moved here a couple of years ago, I've been hiking with my dad since I was a kid. And so, when tourists flock to Silverpine Ridge and our little town becomes stifling, there's nothing better than packing up a few days' worth of supplies and heading out into the wilderness. Tyler suggested the hike. I had just come in from a grueling 2 weeks of work without a break and collapsed into an exhausted pile at the foot of our bed. He looked over and smiled in sympathy. "You look like shit," he said, and I growled and chucked a pillow at him. He laughed, dodging out of the way and grabbing my arms and planting a gentle kiss on my forehead. "Just kidding," he said. "You always look great, even if the bags under your eyes have bags of their own. But you do need a break. I already asked at work and I can take a few days vacation next week. Do you reckon you can swing it with John?" I considered this for a moment. My boss, John, was known for being a bit of a hard ass, but he liked me, and I was definitely due some time off. "No harm in asking, right?" I replied. The next week we loaded up the car with supplies and set out towards one of our favourite trails. We pulled into a parking lot about half a mile from the start, put on our backpacks and set off. While we were walking, Tyler pulled out his map and studied it for a moment. On shorter hikes, we stuck to the beaten path to get as much hiking time in as we could, but when we had more time, we tried to be a bit more adventurous. "So," he said as he traced a route over the waxy paper with his fingers. "If we follow the usual route up to Bear Cove and then take a left up through this area?" I looked down at the map and nodded. "Looks good to me. We should see if we can make it there by tonight," I said, pointing at a small clearing on the map. "John said it's a great camping spot and there's a lake with a waterfall and it's secluded." I trailed off, raising my eyebrows suggestively, and Tyler grinned and looked down at his watch. "Sounds like my kind of place, and it's a reasonable distance. We'll get to Bear Cove by about 11, so I reckon we will make it there by 5 with plenty of time to explore." Having agreed our route, we set off and, as predicted, made it to Bear Cove just after 11. We took a left from there and spent the next couple of hours walking through lush, untouched wilderness. As we walked, I could feel the stress of the last couple of weeks melting off me like dirt in a hot shower. I'd almost completely wound down when Tyler's voice interrupted my calm. "Hey, look," he said, and pointed towards a clearing in the thicket, and through the dense woodland I could see the whitewashed boards of an old farmhouse poking through the branches. "Come on, Lauren. We have to check it out," he said, turning to me, eyes gleaming. I looked back towards the old, run-down building and hesitated. I don't know, Tyler. It looks a bit... I paused and made a face and he grinned. I'm here to look after you, babe. Don't worry. If any crazy, pitchfork-wielding farmers attack us, I promise, I'll protect you. I hit him on the shoulder. Great, thanks. Now you've definitely set this up as a horror film. He laughed at me, and I continued. Luckily for me, if this was a horror film, you would definitely be killed first. So really, all I'd have to do is make sure to outrun you. He laughed, and I set my pack down on the grass. Our rule for exploring away from the path was that we would switch on the Find My iPhone function on my phone and hide it in the bushes with our backpacks, whilst Tyler took his phone with us. It was a bit of a stupid tradition, seeing as we rarely had signal on the trail, and always made sure to let our friends know our predicted timelines away. But the extra security made me feel better. Tyler swung our backpacks into the bushes, grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the house. We walked up to a wooden fence that marked the perimeter of the property and hopped over it. It took us 10 minutes to walk up through the long grass of what must have been the front lawn, and the closer that we got, the clearer it became that the house was long since abandoned. When we arrived at the front porch, I raised a hand and tentatively knocked on the front door. Tyler snorted and, leaning past me, tried the handle. The door swung open, creaking on old hinges, and stale air wafted out from the house. I wrinkled my nose and stepped into the hallway. Hello? I called out, the sound hanging dead in the air. Anybody in here? Shouted Tyler, but only silence greeted us. I smiled at him, indicating with my expression that he had been right, and made my way further into the house. From behind me, I heard him open one of the old wooden doors, and I pushed another open to my right. I walked into an old farmhouse kitchen that would have been picturesque had every surface not been covered in a thick layer of dust. Next to the kitchen counter was a dining table and 4 chairs with intricate patterns carved into the wood, and opposite me on the windowsill was a framed photograph. I crossed the room, picked it up, studying a photo closely. It was black and white and showed an elderly couple standing next to each other in front of their old house. I shivered, wondering why this particular picture had been left behind. There was a squeak on the floorboards behind me, and I stiffened. Before I could turn around, a hand clamped over my mouth. Hot flesh muffled my screams and, in my struggle to get away, I dropped the picture and heard the glass smash as it hit the floor. The hand released me, and I spun around to find a sheepish-looking Tyler and a hidden panel door connecting the kitchen to whatever room he had been exploring. "You asshole!" I shrieked, shoving him away from me, the force pushing him back into the table. "I'm sorry. It was a joke. I didn't think you'd freak out so much." "You didn't realize that if you snuck up behind me in an empty room, in a deserted house in the middle of nowhere, that I would freak out?" I said incredulously. He looked at me and I could tell he was trying not to laugh. "Fuck you, Tyler." And I stormed out of the kitchen, adrenaline and anger pounding through my veins. I walked out of the house, the front door ricocheting off the wall and slamming shut as I marched towards our backpacks. It took a few minutes for Tyler to catch up with me, and when he did, he was slightly out of breath. "Babe, slow down," he said, grabbing my hand. "Leave me alone," I said, trying to shake him off. "Oh, I'm really sorry. It was just meant to be a joke." He pulled gently on my hand. I slowed down and looked at him. "Honestly, I didn't think you'd be so scared." He looked so earnest that I just shook my head at him and sighed. "Okay," I said. "I know. I believe you, and I may have overreacted slightly, but you know, I have a crazy imagination." He grinned at me, looking suitably abashed, and slung his arm around my shoulder. "Well, you know what the good thing is?" he said, and I turned to look up at him. "What?" I said, as we squelched through the dewy grass towards our hidden backpacks. At least He stopped as something creaked beneath us. We looked down. "Lauren," he said, and his eyes widened in shock as the ground beneath us crumbled and gave way. I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes, I saw a blurry version of Tyler in front of me. "Thank God!" he gasped and pulled me to him. The sudden movement made my brain feel like it was slushing against the walls of my skull. I turned my head and vomited into the dirt. Tyler tried to stand and fell back to the floor, hissing in pain. "Lauren, you have to find a way out of here," he said through gritted teeth. I shook my head wildly, sending waves of pain crashing through my brain. My vision blurred, but I concentrated on him, and he came slowly into focus. His face was contorted in pain, and there was blood seeping out from a deep gash in his skin. I swallowed. "Lauren," he said, gently pushing my hair away from my face. "This is just going to get worse. We have to get out of here." Sunlight poured in from the hole that we'd fallen through, illuminating the cave. It was wide and almost perfectly spherical. In front of us was a sloping bank down to a pool of water, and off to the right was a tunnel leading out of the cave. Bits of grass and rotten wood littered the floor around us, and Tyler caught me looking at them. The farmers must have boarded it up before leaving. His voice echoed oddly in the cave. Over the years, grass grew over it and the wood rotted. We couldn't have known it was there. His soft tone did nothing to calm the panic simmering in the pit of my stomach. "But what if they did it on purpose?" I whimpered, my voice high. "What if they've trapped us here?" Tyler's eyes widened in surprise. My heart was pounding against my chest. Out the corner of my eye, something shifted in the darkness, and I screamed. Tyler reached out to me, and I batted his hand away, my breath coming in harsh, irregular gasps. "Tyler, I just saw something move. We have to get out of here," I said, and pushed myself to my feet. The movement set my head spinning, and I stumbled and fell against the wall of the cave. Tyler grabbed a hold of me and pulled me down until I was sitting next to him. His warm arms snaked around my waist, pulling me into his chest and holding me there until my breath began to even out. "Lauren, this area is full of cave systems and shallow mines. You know that." His voice vibrated through the warmth of his jacket. I closed my eyes tight. I did know that. Wind River National Park was famous for its intricate cave systems that ran just below the surface. I'd been hiking these trails for 3 years. Hell, Tyler and I had even explored some of them. I swallowed back the rising fear and tried to refocus. "You're right," I said, my gaze falling back to his leg. "Shit, Tyler." "I know," he replied, his face serious. "If I could find a way out, you know that I would, but I don't think I'll get far with this injury." I nodded again and grimaced as the pain in my head flared up. He looked at me, concerned. "Is your head okay?" he asked. I moved my fingers to the back of my head and gingerly brushed the skin at the base of my skull. The pain was instant and sharp, and I winced. Tyler took a hold of my hand and turned it around, and there was blood on my fingers. "Oh, God," he said, his warm hands wrapping around mine. "How do you feel?" I shrugged, trying to keep my head as still as possible. He nodded, and we sat in silence for a few moments, the only noise the sound of water lapping gently at the bank. "Okay," Tyler muttered to himself. I looked at him. Our eyes met, and he gave me a small smile. And grasping my hand on either side of the wall, he grimaced as he pulled himself to his feet, careful to keep his weight off his injured leg. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "One of us needs to find a way out," he said, gingerly putting some weight on his injured leg. A thin sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead as he practiced hobbling forward. His leg then buckled from the strain and he fell back against the wall. I pushed myself up to my feet. The dizziness was still there, and my head was pounding, but I could stand. I walked over to him. "I'll go," I said. He shook his head. I took his hand. "You're messed up, Tyler. You can barely walk." I looped my arm around his waist and helped him lower himself down to the floor. "I'm sorry," he said, and I smiled at him. "It's okay." My words heavily contrasted with the churning fear in my gut. "I've been caving with my dad before. I'll be okay." He smiled at me weakly. He slid his hand into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Take this," he said, and I shook my head. "No, it doesn't make any sense. When I get to the surface, we might need the signal to find you. You keep it." He nodded and reached down to his belt, unclipping his flashlight from its holder. He clicked the button and I looked away as the cavern flooded in a harsh white light. I unclipped my own flashlight and pushed the button. Nothing happened. "Shit," I muttered, shaking it in a futile way that people do when they're trying to fix something electrical. "It must have broken on the way down." And Tyler plucked it out of my hand and pressed the cold metal cylinder of his torch into my palm. "And take this one," he said. "There's still some natural light in this chamber. Besides, I have the torch on my phone if I need it." I nodded at him, and the movement sent shock waves of pain through my skull. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, Tyler, he was studying my face, his expression grim. He held out a hand to me, and I took it. "You're going to be fine, Lauren." I gave him a shaky smile. His hand gripped tighter onto mine, and he returned the smile. "You can do this. I love you." I nodded at him. "I love you too." He let go of my hand, and I turned away from him before he could see the fear in my eyes. I walked out of the cave, the sound of rumbling water echoing off the rocky walls. My boots slapped wetly against the floor as I made my way through the dark. As I walked, the caves began to narrow around me, and panic constricted in my chest as I came to a dead end. I shone my torch over the rocks, searching for a gap in the wall. The torchlight revealing a small opening at the base of the rocks, and the tightness in my chest loosened a little. Crouching down, I shone the light through the gap. It was small, but so was I, and the next cave was close. I just had enough space to squeeze through. I lay down on my front, clenched the torch between my teeth, and tried to shimmy through the opening. The fabric of my hiking jacket caught in the rocks. I hissed in frustration and ripped free from it, the slimy liquid from the floor seeping through the thin material on my thermal shirt. After several minutes of struggling, I managed to pull myself through the hole. I stood up on the other side and shone the torch around the room. The cave branched out into a network of tunnels. I walked forward and the movement sent a lightning bolt of pain darting through my head. I stumbled and dropped the torch. I touched my fingers against my temples, the coldness of them soothing the aching heat in my skull. And gently, I crouched down and picked up the torch. And from somewhere in the darkness came a low growl. I screamed and shone the light towards the noise. The bright light threw up monstrous shadows in the darkness, and I screamed again, throwing myself forward down one of the tunnels. There was a rustling of leathery wings as my movement disturbed a colony of bats. I shrieked as they fluttered out at speed from the darkness. I ran, my hands outstretched in front of my face, following the twists and turns of the cave until I couldn't run anymore. Breathless and exhausted, I collapsed myself down behind some rocks. The light from my torch was shaking. I tried to keep it steady, but my hands were trembling too hard. I clicked it off, my teeth chattering as I tried to control my breathing. I must have blacked out again. When I came to, I was slumped on my side. My mind flooded with panic as I sat up, but subsided as I made out the torch in the darkness. I reached out to pick it up when I realized that I could see the torch there must have been a source of natural light. Relief thawed the terror in my bones, and I stood, slipping the torch into my pocket. Using the side of the rock, I navigated through the semi-darkness. As I walked, the tunnel around me got brighter and brighter until it finally opened into a chamber. In front of me was a muddy bank that extended 5 or 6 meters up to an opening. Now, the bank was steep, but from my position at the edge of the tunnel, I could see grass beyond. My heart swelled in my chest, my head felt clearer, and the sharp pain had morphed into a dull throbbing at the base of my skull. I approached the bank and drew a deep breath and took a running start up the bank. I made it about halfway before the mud beneath my feet betrayed me, and I slipped and tumbled to the bottom. My head pounded with renewed vigor as I lay dazed on the floor. I stood up and looked back cautiously onto the darkness of the tunnel. I felt calmer than before, but the residual terror tapped over my skin like icy fingers. The growl that I'd heard was probably some kind of wild animal, and if it was trapped down here too, it would probably be hungry. I swallowed back the fear and surveyed the bank in front of me. I needed to get out of here before it found me. The mud on the bank was thick and wet, but nettles and plants lined the surface. If they could take my weight, then maybe I could use them as aids to pull myself to the surface. I grabbed onto one of the plants and tugged. It seemed sturdy enough. I started to carefully pull myself up. My fingers stung as I reached up and grasped onto the nettle and winced, but I held on tight. At last, I was near the top. I reached out and grabbed a root, and there was a deep rumbling noise from the darkness below, and as I pulled myself up, something grabbed my foot. Sheer horror ripped through me, and I shrieked in terror, pivoting around. The abrupt movement snapped the root in my hand, and I started to slide back down. Panicked, I grabbed for my previous handhold, but I wrenched the roots out of the ground and tumbled down with them clutched in my hand. I landed at the bottom of the bank, terrified and covered in mud. My eyes darted around the cave, but there was nothing there. I looked up at the bank, and where I had grabbed was a tangle of weeds that I had missed. I must have gotten my foot caught in them as I climbed. I let out a low moan of frustration as I looked up at my escape route. Where I'd fallen, I had created a landslide of mud that had covered the roots and any hope I had of trying to crawl back up. I let out another moan and put my head in my hands. I sat there for a while, rocking back and forth, and eventually stood up. I needed to get out of here. I needed to stop jumping at shadows. I thought about Tyler and the pain in his eyes as the blood seeped from the gash in his leg. I turned and walked out of the chamber. I needed to find another way out. There had to be another way out. So I walked slowly, keeping my torch on and ready as I returned back into the tunnel. My left hand trailed against the cave wall as I walked. The light fell upon an opening in the side of the wall that I had missed on my way past it the first time. I shone the light towards it and saw a narrow tunnel that extended past the reach of the light. I turned to the side and edged down it carefully. As I made my way into the tunnel, the sound of rushing water amplified until I finally made it through to a high-ceilinged cavern. As fast-flowing river rushed through the center of the cave that was lit up by an opening at the top. Relief flooded through me. Snaking round the edge of the chamber was a thin ledge leading up to the exit. I walked over to it, assessing the way out. I'm not a great climber, but if I could get up onto the ledge, I'll be able to shimmy my way along it towards the exit. I reached up and the ledge was just within touching distance. It took me a couple of jumps before I was able to get a good grip, and I managed to heave myself up onto the ledge and stand up. Pushing myself back into the wall as much as I could, I started to edge along. The ledge was thinner and more slippery than I'd realized, and my heart pounded against my ribs as I shuffled along and ascended higher. One wrong step and I would fall, meaning broken bones at the very least. I thought about what it would mean to be paralyzed at the bottom of the chamber in the dark, and decided that maybe there were worse things than death. I was almost to the top when the ledge widened and then abruptly stopped, and with both hands holding onto the wall, I peered over the ledge. I was about 10 meters up, and the gap between the ledge and that flat bank on the exit was half a meter wide. I swallowed and closed my eyes. I was going to have to jump. And so I took a deep breath and leaped across the gorge. On the last step, my foot slipped on the slimy scum of the ledge, and I slightly undershot the jump. For one breathless moment, I was falling. And then I managed to grab onto the ledge, but as my hands held on, I could feel the loose earth beneath my fingers begin to crumble. I gritted my teeth and willed every ounce of my remaining strength into my aching arms. I fumbled around for something to hold onto, and my fingers found a root. I held onto it and tried to calm my breathing, determined not to make the same mistake again. I moved my right foot to touch the side of the cave, and carefully I began to probe the wall. When I found an indent on the side of the rock face, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding in and pulled myself upwards, using both the roots and the ledge for support. My arms strained as I heaved myself up and onto the ledge, but I grinned through gritted teeth. I was doing it. Finally, I pulled my full body up and onto the bank and collapsed onto my back, closing my eyes and letting the warmth of the dappled twilight drench my cold skin. I let out a peal of laughter and lay there for a moment, experiencing a swelling of happiness beneath my chest, before rolling onto my knees and standing up. As I turned towards the entrance of the cave, a man stepped through, pointing his rifle at me. "Don't move," he said. His accent was thick and strange. He was thin and old, with white, wispy hair curling from his scalp. I looked at him, bewildered and frozen to the spot. "There's a good girl." The barrel of the gun was still trained on me. "What?" I stuttered and stopped as the light from the cave caught the gun, making the metal gleam menacingly. "Why are you doing this?" My voice quivered from the cold and fear. He shook his head and pointed with the gun towards the other side of the ledge. "Stand over there." I shook my head. "Please," I begged, an edge of hysteria creeping into my voice. "Let me go." "I'm sorry, girl, but I just can't do that. You see, I've been keeper of this place ever since my daddy passed, God rest his soul, and it's my job to keep it happy." He paused, and the rifle dipped as he peered over the edge into the darkness. I moved towards the exit, and he laughed, pointing the gun back at me. I let out an involuntary whimper. "Don't you go getting any ideas, girl." He motioned with the gun. "Stand over there, like I told you." I closed my eyes for a second, and then moved to where he had pointed, the sound of the river roaring beneath me. "Please, let me go," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I won't tell anyone about you or this place, I promise." He sighed. "You know we used to say that if people made it out this far, they were free to go." He wiped one of his hands across his brow. "That if they beat us fair and square, we let them up to the house, get them a warm bed, and then send them on their way. But it's been a long time. People don't come through these parts no more. In the cave, it's hungry." He stepped towards me, raising a rifle to my head. "Please," my voice was weak, "please don't shoot me." He gave me a sad smile. "I'm not gonna shoot you." My heart lifted. My expression must have changed because he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. The butt of the rifle shot out and connected with my stomach. I doubled over in pain and felt the weight of his boot on my shoulder as he nudged me backwards off the ledge. My arms flailed and the air whistling in my ears as I fell. I landed with a heavy splash in the river at the base of the cave, narrowly missing the floor. I struggled in a current and emerged from the water, gasping for air. The current was strong and I realized too late that it was pulling me towards the underwater passage by the mouth of the cavern. I took a deep breath just before I was sucked under and into the dark. I tumbled through the icy passage until my lungs began to burn in protest at the lack of oxygen. My shoulder slammed into a rocky outcrop and made a sickening crunch. I let out a gargled scream of pain, my lungs then filling with water as I tried to draw back the breath that I had released. As I choked on water, my mind flooded with blind panic. I was going to drown. I was going to drown here in this fucking cave. And suddenly, my head broke the surface and I coughed violently, expelling the water from my chest. I gasped, swallowing thick, painful gulps of air down my windpipe and into my burning lungs. The current had now subsided and it carried me gently along as I coughed and hacked until I bumped against a sloping bank. I blinked against the dim light and, using my uninjured arm, clawed my way up the bank and out of the water. I rolled onto my back and closed my eyes, my chest heaving. The freezing water had soaked through my thick hiking gear and I began to shiver in the cold. And that's when I smelt it. That unholy smell of iron and waste. I let out a small whimper and opened my eyes, rolling onto my side. I was in the cavern that we'd first fallen through. And in the corner, under the dusky light that filtered through the hole in the ceiling, sat Tyler. He was right where I had left him. As my eyes began to adjust to the dim light, I could see the whites of his glassy eyes that stared past me, empty and motionless. His face, it was untouched, frozen in a mask of horror. Just below his collarbone was a mess of blood and bone, and his stomach cavity, it was empty. A trail of blood and flesh trailed out of the cave along the same path that I had taken just a few hours earlier. Using the last of my strength, I crawled towards him, covering my mouth to keep me from screaming. I pulled myself up so that I was sat next to him on the side of the floor that wasn't drenched in blood. And tears welled up, and I swallowed back a gag as I gently dipped my hand into his pocket. My hands clasped around the cold metal of his phone, and I pulled it out. 30% battery. And so that's why I'm typing this warning. I know that it's now just a matter of time until whatever killed Tyler comes back for me. That's if exposure doesn't get me first. I'm not sure how long it's been since we first fell down here, but I can already feel my body beginning to shut down from the cold. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but if you're reading this, please be careful when you're hiking. Stay close to what you know and don't stray off the beaten track. And if you come across an old, weather-beaten farmhouse about 40 minutes from Bear Cove, run. Run as fast as you can and never look back. Wow. Another one. Wow. Absolutely chilling and quite a heartbreaking story there for the incredible mind of GraceGabriellle over on Reddit No Sleep. Of course, guys and girls, please do take a second to click the link, of which I'll leave in the description box below the video. That'll take you over to the GraceGabriellle Reddit profile, where you can smash a follow or smash an upvote. And why not leave a nice comment thanking her for her incredible story. As ever, you know the drill here. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you have a story you'd like to share with us here on the show, why not get in touch with myself at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. I hope you're all doing well and keeping fit and focused during these testing times. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.